All right, so in Unit 3, what we're going to do is we're going to use our knowledge of putting font on the screen and then using the update method to our advantage to update our code to actually create a visual timer that will change and match time on the screen. So the timer we're going to make in this particular lesson will count down from 30 down to whenever we tell it to stop. But that's what we're doing here is we're going to create a timer that will start at 30 and count down. So what we need to do in order to do this is we need to actually get the font into our program. But what I need you to do is pause the video, go open up a project called Unit 6 Lesson 3 Visual Timer, and then we'll move forward with getting that font into our program. All right, so assuming that you are now ready with the project in front of you, I want you to go into the computer science section of your folder and open up Monogame. And then from here, I need to make sure that it's linked to my program, which I can see it is, but I'm going to make sure just to be sure. So File, Open. I'm then going to go into my folder, Visual Studio 2015, Projects, Unit 6, Lesson 3, Visual Timer. Go into the Content folder and connect it to the pipeline. Then from here, I want to add in a font. So I do Add New Item. I'm going to add a Sprite font, and I'm going to call this one Chiller. I'm going to use the Chiller font here. Press OK. And then I'm going to rebuild it just to make sure that it builds properly. It looks like we're good to go. So then from here, I come into the Content folder, add Existing Item, and now if I go into the Content folder of my project, and I do View All Files, I should be able to add Chiller right into my game. Then from here, I want to actually click on the font and update all of that information. So the font name should not be Arial, it should be Chiller. Then I have the size be size 30. And then if you want to change anything else, you can. I think I'm just going to change it to be bold. And then I save my work and I go back and look at the code for my game. So I know that if I want to display a font on the screen and I want to use a font, I need to create a sprite font object. And this one I'm just going to call Chiller to match my font. I also know that I'm going to need to initialize that, and that happens in the load content section. So I come down here to load content, and I'm going to actually load in that content. So I named it Chiller. It's going to be equal to this dot content dot load. I'm going to load in a sprite font, and this sprite font is going to be named Chiller, and I can see that by looking over here right at Chiller. It's chiller.sprite font, so I can just put Chiller here. Then now that I've got my font ready to go, I know I also need to have a vector2 object to display it to the screen. So I have a vector2 object. I'm going to call this timer because that's what it's going to display onto the screen. So down here, I need to initialize it in initialize. So I have timer is equal to new vector2 object, and I know that my vector2 object takes in two parameters. I need its x and y location. I'm just going to put its x location at 100 and its y location at 50. So I know now that I at least have a vector location and a font. Then the last chunk here is I want to draw this to the screen just to make sure that it is working. So I have sprite batch dot begin, sprite batch dot end, and then for right now I can put sprite batch dot draw string, and I can put some things in here if I want, just to kind of be placeholders until I have my changing counter. So I know that I need my sprite font, the font that I'm going to use, which is Chiller. My text is going to be time remaining with a colon, and then I'll need to put my time remaining in later. And then from here, I also need the vector2 object, which is called timer. And I need the color, which I'll do color.blue. So from here, if I run my program, I should see that my font works and my vector has a location and will display text, and I can see that right there. Awesome. So the next thing I need to think about is how I'm going to display a timer to the screen. And this is a little bit trickier because we're going to have to use the game loop to our advantage. So What I'm going to do here is I'm going to start commenting in some new things that I'm doing to actually display that timer to the screen. First, I'm going to have something that's going to track the game loop. So I'm going to call this game loop, and it's going to be an integer. And the purpose of this game loop is it's going to count how many times the game loop has run, because I know I can use the speed of the game loop to my advantage. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an integer called time left. And I'm going to start that equal to 30. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this track the number of seconds remaining. And I'm going to ask these two variables to work together. Game loop is going to track how many times the game loop has run. And I'm going to make an extra note here. Every 60 times, time left will decrease by 1. So every time the game loop counter has gone 60 times, I know that 1 second has passed. And every time that happens, I'm going to change my time left variable here. So if I come down here into update, this is where I'm actually going to have this code take place. I'm going to have the game loop increment every single time. And then if game loop is equal to 60, this is when changes in my code are going to occur. Every time game loop hits 60, my time remaining variable is going to subtract 1. The time left, excuse me, not time remaining, time left. And then I'm going to reset the game loop to be equal to 0. So every time that time left, or every time game loop hits 0, time left decreases by 1, and game loop starts over. So this is actually going to track the amount of time that's going by in my program. Now this is all great, but it doesn't really help us unless we can display it to the screen. And this is where the idea of concatenating words together actually comes into play. So you learned in previous classes about concatenating or combining strings. Concatenate just means to basically add together, and we use the plus sign to concat strings. So we learned previously that if you put the plus sign in between two strings of text, it will put them together. Now the tricky part here is it will put them together literally. It doesn't assume that you want to add spaces in. So you'll see here, if we concatenate hello in quotations with world in quotations, it concatenates to be hello world with no space. Now here, if I wanted to add in a space, you'll see here I've actually added in a space there. It says my name is space plus John plus, and then you'll see another space before Smith. It concatenates that as well. It'll say my name is John Smith if we concatenate and add them together. Now the cool thing about concatenating words is we can also concatenate by using variables. So if a variable represents a string, a variable can be included in a concatenation. So here, you can be a string or it can be an integer. So age could be either. What will happen here is it will say I am plus, and with age here, what will happen is it will take 25, the int, and it will turn it into a string, and it will concatenate and add it right onto the end of our larger string. So it's kind of cool. You can take I am and then add on the age, and it'll turn it all into one big string to be displayed on your screen. The nice thing about using variables is we can change what age will be, and it will, as a result, display different phrases depending on what part of the program we are in. Now, the one tricky part about this is if you want spaces, you have to actually formally add them in. So here you can see I have 1989 plus age. Then if you want a space, I actually added in a space here. It says plus, and that's just a little space in there, and then plus the year. So you can see that because there was no space between 1989 and age, that they smushed together, but because I included that space here, there is a space here. So what we're going to do in our program is we are actually going to put this and concatenate it into our string that's down in our draw sprite batch section. So I'm going to have to do that on the next video because this one's about to run into time, but we're going to actually concatenate these together, and then we'll turn them into 3 dimensions as well on the next video.